Hey, it's Vladimira.
And I'm Nektarios.
And this is Naked by the Future Farm.
Join us as we strip entrepreneurship to its vulnerable core.
Emma, welcome again on Naked. It's wonderful to see.
Oh, likewise, Vladdy. Thanks for having me both.
It's good to see you, Emma.
Good to see you, Nick, as well. So, a lot to go through. Today's episode will be, I think, very exciting one for a number of points, and I'll get to those. But before I go into the actual heavy subject, because they're usually quite heavy, let's do our usual ritual. So when you joined in, you had this beautiful background with the palm tree on it, and you teased us a little bit that you actually came from some vacation, but even the place where you are based in, we know for a fact is quite a beautiful place to be. So where in the world are you?
So I am in Barcelona at the moment, and actually I've actually been away the last week. So I've got, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, I've had twins since we last spoke. Twin boys, maybe? No? Okay, maybe.
Wow!
Looking at Vladdy's face, that was a no.
I was trying to figure out whether that's my English or if I got it actually right.
That's hilarious.
Congratulations.
No. Thank you.
That's
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And so since I've been away from them for, I feel embarrassed to say it, for almost a week. And so I just came back yesterday, basically, from being away for a week for work and a small holiday with some friends for the weekend. And I feel I'm super happy to be home. I'm so happy to be home. I didn't think I'd be saying that. So, but I honestly felt like that was way too long to be away. And I just had my fix of cuddles before they went to nursery this morning. And I am in Barcelona, back in Barcelona.
You just made this episode exponentially more interesting right now. And this is like impromptu.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Nektarios, usual?
I'm in London. My usual in London, as you can tell by my... So Emma, I say this at every episode. We have this new company, production company, who encourages, which is not new anymore, which encourages us to have a more kind of green background. So every time before we record, I shift the plants in the house around.
Oh, I love it.
So this one doesn't live here normally.
I love your veil. I'll call it a veil. It's beautiful. Very nice.
Yeah.
Like a Spanish mantilla.
I just want to be in your apartment right now.
That's beautiful.
Your house.
It is actually a wonderful place. It has a good Zen energy.
Nice.
But speaking of plants, so I've got a feedback from our previous episodes from our producers is like, what was that background? Like, please avoid that background. And so this time around, being in Pakistan, I, paradoxically got more flexibility. So I moved this plant here. So there's a little bit of greenery. But yeah, Karachi, it is for me. So beautiful 3 locations. Yeah. So again, very much a global call. Yeah. So Emma, we identified, thanks to Nektarios, prior we started recording, that it's been about 3.5 years since we recorded first time together on Naked.
Yeah.
It feels that long, or
I can't believe that. I know, and I commented on how amazing you both look. I'm like, what? How has it been 3.5, 4 years or whatever it is? It's wild to think that much time has gone past. Yeah, a lot has happened in that time as well.
When we started recording, it was sort of the beginning of the pandemic. It was about 3 months into lockdown in the UK, where we all were trying to make sense of this new world. And we're all talking about mental health and the challenges in the context of a very different world. But you just said you had babies. I mean, that in itself is a big life event, but you also had a few major changes in your career. So I think I think the world is very different for all of us. Vladdy sort of moved to Pakistan full time. I started a new business. We reflected on the challenges of an early stage fintech business, both Vladdy and I, in conversations, because it's been really hard. This particular, I think we're curious in this conversation a little bit more about you exiting a business, starting something new. So that's a particular kind of area of focus for us. But yeah, it's I think we look all very similar to what we look two and a half years ago, but I don't feel the same.
Mm.
I think I've learned a lot in that time, and I kind of have a curiosity also to see what you've gone through, because it's been a really weird 3.5 years.
Yeah, it definitely has.
Mm.
Definitely has. I mean, yeah, it feels, yeah, the world has changed, where some of us back in the office, some of us not, some of us hybrid. There's been a lot of change, and there's just so much going on, even outside of work, right? There's just a lot going on in the world. The world is very different. But yeah, it's been wild. It's been a wild journey. I mean, I feel I feel like the last 3.5, 4 years have been wilder than the previous, for me, 40. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, what is going on? But yeah, I'm happy to say, like, I think since the last time we spoke, in a much better place. I'm very happy at the moment, touch wood. And yeah, obviously having kids, that has changed my perspective quite a bit. I think it was what I needed, to be honest, to have, people in my life that are just so new to it, and yeah, just so, yeah, naive to, I guess, to some degree, like, in everything. And it just brings a freshness and newness to the way in which I see the world, which I really, really value. So yeah, very different.
Mm. So just to help some of our listeners who are, let's say, meeting you first time and they haven't listened, by the way, go and listen. Nektarios, I think you identified it's episode number probably 3 or 4, I believe. Three it is. So you'll find it on your podcast applications. But some context, right? Why are we talking today? And I think we already all three know that there's so much of richness that we can go to. But there was a particular sort of one thing that we felt with Nektarios that it would be wonderful to explore together. And when I was reading through this startup online magazine, Sifted, which people in Europe are very familiar with, I came across this article. And we've been in touch in the 3 years here and there, and I've been following you online and all the amazing things that you are doing. But this particular article sort of landed on my screen, and I was like, whoa, that's Emma. And then started reading, and the title said, I have it here, I felt lost and empty. Founders sharing their exit blue stories. Exiting isn't all champagne and party poopers. And
Poppers.
sort of poppers. It can't be poopers.
Different thing.
I think there you go. I think in Vlad's world. So poppers and poopers. Anyhow, but I think the thing that made me reflect, Emma, was that I remembered from our conversation how beautifully reflective you've been on your mental health and sort of your relationship with yourself already many years ago. And we discussed that on Naked. So I was very curious to sort of read through the article, and there were many sort of new points, and it resonated a lot. So when Nektarios and I felt that actually the sort of journey for founders towards when they're entering the exit point is still something that carries a lot of stigma and is very little talked about, and is linked to this heavy expectation of like something amazing will await for you, right, at the top of the hill. And I think we all know that the sort of next steps for many people, or the pathways, can feel very different. So not to sort of explain or sort of share a lot from your journey, because that's why you are here with us. But I think before we even go there and we go deeper into the exit, let's refresh a little bit for the newcomers on your entrepreneur journey and what happened before you came to the point of exiting your business Body Bounce to another player.
Yeah, so let me think how far to go back. So I'll just give a quick summary, right? So I basically got into tech very, very early on, so from a very young age. And I ended up going off to uni and studying engineering. I actually started off in like computer science, but then after the first year, changed to engineering, which was much more of a good, a better fit for me personally. And that was more so because there was just like, it was more of a 9 to 5. So I didn't have the distractions of like just being on campus and, partying and whatever. I had to do some work, right? And also just because it covered the spectrum of engineering. So I was doing a lot of different things, from software all the way through to hardware and electronics and stuff like that. And so it was very, very interesting for me. And when I completed that, went into the world of work, started off on an organization called Macrovision, went off to work at Microsoft, worked at various different places. Anyway, so fast forward to, I think it was around 2006 now, I met my co-founder, Julia, and she was my flatmate, actually. I'd been living in Reading to be closer to the company that I was working at, and then decided, you know what, I want to be in London. I'm still in my early 20s. Like, what am I doing? Like, almost like in a small town. I want to be in the thick of it. And ended up interviewing for this flat share with these two Italian ladies, Julia and Laura, and ended up living with them. And Julia was actually a designer. So we had really complementary skills. We used to go out, similar taste in music, all of that. So we used to spend a lot of time together. And basically, we established that we both wanted to be entrepreneurs. And that was the path that we wanted to go down. So essentially half of my career has been in the corporate world and then the other half in the startup world. So anyway, we ended up building out this startup with another friend called Taxi Jungle, went on a startup weekend and ended up taking a throwaway idea, which was Buddy Bounce. And it was a throwaway idea because it wasn't something that we were actively working on, but it was something that we were like, okay, we don't want people to know, you know, the whole thing that people tend to do, which is like, which you should never do when you run a startup, is don't share your actual idea. We went with this throwaway idea because we were so secretive and protective about about Taxi Jungle. Anyway, went on this thing, ended up winning an award, started most likely to make $1 million. And from that point, we just went on this whirlwind journey whereby this throwaway idea, it felt like there was so much momentum building. And every time we'd go into a room with somebody who was incredible, they would open the door to another incredible person. So it just felt like we had to follow this lead. And eventually, next thing you know, we hadn't even parked Taxi Jungle formally, but next thing you know, we're all in on this other idea. Anyway, ended up raising for it. So ended up going on the first Wyra cohort and raising a small amount and going on that accelerator. Raised a seed round, then did a down round, actually a small down round, which I can get into later, before exiting to a competitor called CrowdMix. And it was a whirlwind journey. There were so many highs and so many lows. And I think both Julia and I don't think we realized what we were getting ourselves into, to be quite honest with you. We didn't realize how much it would affect our mental health. We didn't realize, you know, just how much of a whirlwind it was. And almost like, I guess the other side of it, which is like how much you almost need to like just always present yourself with a straight face, you know, and almost like live a lie in a way, right, in order to progress. And so it was just a whirlwind of a journey, really. That is the
So Emma, you mentioned that you were voted most likely to make $1 million.
Yeah.
So a lot of people get into this because they think this startup will make them rich. People use the word exit, having very clear association what it means. So when you won this accolade, most likely to win $1 million, did you believe that? Did you actually believe that you will come out of this being millionaires?
I think so, yeah. And actually, just to point out, like my whole thing. So before that, I was working at a large corporate, right? I was actually a consultant. So I'd kind of gone on a bit of an entrepreneur journey. I had a limited company and I was basically contracting, right? And so prior to going all in on Buddy Bounce, I felt like the way I presented it was like, I felt like I had golden handcuffs. So I was like being paid a really decent amount of money. I had a great life, you know, I could, you know, eat where I want, you know, I had a decent life, but I felt like, hold on, what is earning money if you don't have freedom? And so my big desire was to be free from the sort of corporate machine and free from having to sit at this desk 9 to 5, even if I could do the job in 2 hours, was my case. Because before that, I was actually technical and I was doing a lot of programming and I loved that. So like time would go like that. Like I'd be, next thing you know, I'd sit down at 9 and it was 5 o'clock already. But when I moved into more management, so I became a Scrum Master, I was like, whoa, hold up. I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, I've got 7 hours left. And it's like tick, tick, tick. So I was like, oh my God, this is almost worse than, the other challenges I had in my corporate life. So I was like, I need to be free from this. I want to be able to live. So yeah, the £1 million thing, the definition or the award that we won, for me, I think we did to some degree. And actually the reason why we went on to a startup weekend was because we had the skills to build something, and we actually had built the first prototype of Taxi Jungle, but we didn't know how to market it. We didn't know how to sell it. And that was what we wanted to gain more than anything. And so when they said that, it was almost like, oh, okay, somebody else has seen that there's a way that this thing could make money. And that was, yeah, definitely a motivating factor, but I never actually went into it thinking, do you know what sounds really weird to say this, because obviously when you raise investment, there is obviously, there's a reason why that investor has invested in you, and there is probably there's an exit event that they want to trigger in order for them to realize the rewards of their investment. But in my head, and even though we used to have it our exit strategy on our deck and all of that, for me that was not really the motivating factor for going into the business, or certainly I was not looking at the same exit that maybe our investors were looking at, if I'm being honest.
Speaking of the exit strategy, I'm thinking, where in that journey of building have you guys together with your co-founder started actually articulating and making it more real? What would that end look like? And maybe if you can speak a little bit also about the emotional connection, because I think that's often really hard for different people for different reasons.
Yeah, do you know what? I remember it was actually an investor, somebody who went on to be an investor of ours, that was the one that was like, you don't have an exit strategy in your deck, and he helped us write it, right? And quite honestly, I don't think Julia or I actually talked about whether or not that exit event that he saw was quite what we saw. We never really talked about it, to be honest, at that point. For me and Julia, I think we were just both like fixated on the present. We weren't even thinking. And actually, also to say, like, along the journey, we'd received three offers to be bought. And we actually received our first offer to be bought right at the beginning of the journey. Like, I say beginning, before we'd even launched, we had received an offer to be bought, and that motivated us even more, because we were like, we considered the first offer and we didn't take it, and we both were like, nah, we want to be really big, like, but we never actually quantified what that meant. We were just like, we want to, and I had other motivations as well, that were personal ones, that were more about, like, I don't want to go into too much detail on this one, but just somebody seeing this, so for my motivation, and I didn't realize that at the time, that actually I was doing it for the wrong reasons at that time as well. Like, I was kind of, and I had to actually kind of reconfigure that later on. I could probably touch on it a little bit, but I needed to understand my motivations. I needed to go through a process of understanding why I was doing what I was doing. But certainly it was to be seen by a particular family member.
It's interesting. Sorry, go ahead. You go, Vlad.
Lots of thoughts. I was just about to share one personal reflection, is that the reason why I asked is that even now when I'm building here in Pakistan and I have two co-founders, and it's an interesting conversation. We are on the journey now for about 2.5, 3 years. So quite, it's not a baby, but there are founders that are thinking like, hey, 4 or 5 years, I'm out. And when I'm thinking personally, I think when first time I was sort of in some way even forced to reflect, I remember the resistance. I was like, why are you even pushing me into that space, mental space? Because I was like, I'm, like you said, I'm here and now, and I don't know, like, I don't want to look. And so yeah, not an easy space, and it can create also tensions between co-founders. But yes, Nektarios, you were saying.
No, I think you just put some things on the table that are crucial for this conversation, right? The one of them is that the motivations to do things. And most of us have personal motivations, but there are a lot of similarities. I mean, you phrased it you were very cautious in the way you just alluded to it. But if you start scratching, a lot of people actually come from a similar place. But also a lot of founders, especially first-time founders, don't go into this thinking about this very much.
Yeah.
So there is this naivety. But when you ask people, well, how do you find success? You'll probably get very different answers, even within co-founding teams, especially when they haven't sat down and talked about this, right? So you're talking about being sort of nudged into an exit strategy conversation that may not have reflected your actual feelings about it. In the end, comes back to bite you when you have that exit moment, because it could mean something very different between you and co-founders, investors, etc., as you alluded to. I think it's really interesting, but it's also, and I don't know if you're comfortable asking this, but what would have been success for you at the beginning?
Yeah, I guess definitely not a quantifiable value, but certainly, in my head, and I would say my like naive head, because I was very naive at that point. I think it was just sort of like not having to work, like not having to get out of bed and go into the corporate I was working at. And not that I didn't like it. I mean, I loved the company I worked at, and that's why I'm not naming the name, because I don't want to. It was a great place to work, but it was just like, I was like, why am I doing this? I'm working on something that I don't really have a full picture of, like I'm working this tiny thing over here for a product that I don't necessarily care about. And so I think in some ways, a little bit of it was like search for meaning. So a little bit was like freedom. I just always had this idealistic view of like what freedom meant. And for me at that point in time, it was just the ability to do what I wanted when I wanted, and not be, have to sort of dictate to my boss, or, not having a boss, this kind of thing. And then there was, and again, like I didn't realize this until later, but there was an element of it that was, I wanted my biological father to see me, but I didn't realize this until later. So I wanted whatever I was working on to be big enough to be seen, if that makes sense. So there were a number of motivating factors which were not healthy. There were not the right reasons to be doing anything. And I had to, I was forced into actually having to reconcile those at a point during Buddy Bounce, actually, which was positive, and probably where, like, a number of things came up, including, the mental health side of it, and not just obviously working 12 hours a day and literally putting all your eggs in one basket, but also like having to confront, going through the highs and lows of normal life, like relationships as well as business, all of these things, like the death of my biological dad, all this stuff came up during it. And so I had to, I think when you're younger, it's not even about running away. You tend to bury things, right? You bury them. And then all of a sudden you're confronted with it. And if you don't have the tools to be able to deal with that, it will cause more issues. And I think that's what happened with me, essentially. So it wasn't just a case of like, and when we get into more of the exit stuff, it wasn't just like the exit. It was like all the other things that I had to unpack as a result of that, and my identity being wrapped up in the organization, all sorts of stuff came up.
I'm looking at Nektarios whether he's ready to fire.
No. It's the last thing you said, Emma. It's never binary. It's never consequential, right? So they erupted or things came up during the exit process, but they're always there. So we find ways of compensating for this. And it's interesting because, again, you put so many words on the table that we got used to hearing in a good way. Because if you start breaking it down, there's a motivation for doing something, which we touched upon. There's an idea of where we want to take something and what is success. And then, of course, as a founder, this becomes your identity. So there's no line between your personal identity and your professional identity, right? I mean, if I were to paraphrase this, you were looking to create a professional identity to make your personal identity shine and be seen by people that you wanted to be seen, right? So how did this all accumulate then? What was the moment where you realized that, hang on a second, things things go beyond the traditional roller coaster, the ups and downs of the founder life. Was this as it was approaching your exit, or was the exit a trigger point? When
Oh,
did things go?
there were so many trigger points. I think we touched on some of them in the last podcast. So sort of like just the things that come up during, and actually the exit. So after the exit, so we sold to CrowdMix, and that whole process took quite a while. It took over a year actually for that to complete. But then literally a matter of months afterwards, CrowdMix went under. And so, and there were a load of things that happened through that process. Like I mean, I can't even, some of the things are just ridiculous, but a lot of things happened to both myself and Julia, my co-founder. And then we're part of this other organization, you know, that we'd exited to. And then literally within a matter of months, they go under. And so actually I don't, part of me wasn't, you know, when they went under, yeah, there was a consequence of that, you know. So half of the money that we were supposed to receive, we didn't receive because they went under. But I was also happy because I was free. I was going to leave anyway, right? So I was going to forego some of the earn out because I had enough when I was there. And so I was actually already making plans for for that point to leave. And then anyway, so then we ended up, so they went through administration and all of that happened. And then I was free. And me and my partner at the time decided, look, let's go to live in Thailand. I had a very good friend of mine who's living out there, who has been living out there for the past 8 years. And so I'd gone to visit him when, you know, pardon my French, but when shit was hitting the fan in December, I think it was, of 2015. So I was going through a lot of like madness at work. So, you know, wild stuff was going on. And so I literally booked a ticket and went out. He was like, just come out here, went out to visit him. And that's when you know, that was my first venture into the digital nomad world. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So when I'd made the decision that I was leaving, I'd already said, right, I'm going there. As soon as you know, this next tranche comes, I'm out. And then they went under, right? And so I was free and I was like, oh wow. I don't, so part of me obviously was sad. Like, don't get me wrong. It was a really weird mixture of emotions, right? So part of me was just like, I needed to get out of this wild environment, and this was a way out. And as soon as we went out to Thailand, that's when I started getting these nightmares. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Because I'm free, but actually in some way, like that freedom just opened up a whole can of new worms, because then I'm getting nightmares and I'm like, okay, as soon as stuff's popping up in dreams, like there's stuff I need to deal with that I haven't dealt with. And that was a massive, so it was worrying for me, because I was like, wow, like I haven't had nightmares in years. Why am I getting nightmares about body bounce, about, you know, my relationships with various different people? I was just like, I was at a miss to like what was going on. And that was when I was confronted. I knew I had to confront it, essentially. That was the point when I was like, okay, I need to do something here, because this should be a positive time, even though I know that there was some negative elements to it. For me, I was like, I'm free. Like I'd reconciled it as a positive, and I was like, right, I need to move on, but I couldn't move on. And yeah, that was a big trigger point for me.
Maybe coming back a little bit to the moment of, or the period of preparing for the exit. I'm curious whether you carried any expectation which were coming from within your own system, or even from the outside system, of like what's coming and how you should feel and what is coming, sort of what will be the follow on, maybe also with your co-founder, whether you've had different experiences.
Yeah, I think there was, it's a bit of a weird one, because I think we were almost, I think obviously, you know, there was probably a day or two of like celebration, but we were so in the deep end still. It wasn't like, it's like we were exiting to another company, but I think there was, okay. So one thing I do remember, one emotion that just came to me was the feeling of like freedom, a little bit of freedom again, because
Okay.
we were under like a massive pressure cooker, I think, when we were going alone. And it was almost like, okay, now there are lots of other people, the company we were exiting to were, I think at its height, it was like 108 people. I think when we joined, maybe there were about 50 people. So there was like sort of easing of pressure, thinking actually there's loads of other people now who are going to be part of this thing. It isn't just on mine and Julia's sort of heads. Do you know what I mean? So there was that. There was also like I'd been going through quite a bit with an ex, so it wasn't all rosy. It was a negative time in my personal life. What else? And then yeah, the expectation that we're joining a bigger ship, right? And this is gonna sort of like guarantee us getting to a certain point. But one of the reasons why we exited as well, we made the decision to actually start sort of instigating the exit because we did, was I think we'd both gotten to the point where we were burnt out and we were burnt out. We both realized that actually, in terms of like, we didn't have any much more in us to give to something that we'd realized actually didn't have enough big of a purpose. Like it wasn't something that was, yes, it was a great idea. Yes, it's a great, interesting product. But actually, did we really care deeply enough on the dark days? I used to always say this. Do I care enough on the rainy days when you're not getting paid? When, do you know what I mean? It's raining. We're in London. It's raining pretty much all the time. You're having to get up. You're having to motivate people. Do we really care enough about the problem to continue? And I think we both gotten to the point where we were like, you know what, we've done this for 6 years now. Like, I think let's just see if we can be part of something bigger, where there are other people who are also taking responsibility for solving the problem and getting this to a certain point. And I think, yeah, we were both tired, basically. We were both tired. That was definitely the overwhelming feeling. And then we joined, and then we're, working on new products and services, or so we had to continue, and we got to stay for 2 years or however long the earnout was. I can't remember now, but yeah, so it wasn't really like a celebratory. Maybe we celebrated for a couple of nights, but on to the next, you know what I mean? It was just like a continuation of yeah, everything else that we were going through, really.
This is Naked by the Future Farm.
Join us as we strip entrepreneurship to its vulnerable core. I'm really grateful you just described that, Emma, because when you start a business for the first time and you think about whatever exit means, nobody thinks about earnouts. Nobody thinks about having been forced to work for a company that is not the company you built. Having to adjust to a new culture, having to wait until you get the cash, so all these things, and ultimately having to do things that you don't really want to be doing, and having a boss.
Yeah.
So it's really important to spell these things out, right? I have a friend who exited his business that he built over 13 years or 12 years. And he made double-digit millions on the back of it. But the last years of his earnout were the point that you made. It's like, I'd rather forego some of that money because I'm suffocating here. I'm now bound, especially if it's not exiting to another startup, but exiting to a corporate. We all think, oh, we bring somebody startup in because that will make the company more cool, right? And you go, oh, that's not how it works, right? But also the thing that I find really interesting is you were not as explicit about it, so maybe you can confirm or contradict, but the point you made about by the time you actually initiated the exit or instigated the exit, you were already so thin on energy, motivation, fire, all these things, that the idea of you working in another environment for another couple of years on a sort of half-hearted way to look at what you built sounds terrifying and sounds quite sad.
Yeah, I mean, there were some elements that were exciting about it, but to be honest with you, I feel like, I think once we got in there, because we were like, I remember we went to a shareholder meeting And I think that's when we were both like, oh, wow, these people are like on another level to us. You know, they were going into detail about things that they had way more experience. That was on the out, you know, when we looked at it from the outset, we're in this room with all these people, and we're like, yeah, this is where our baby, this is the next step of the journey, right? It's now we're going to learn about how to do it properly. And we enter this, and honestly, it was like the wild, wild west. Like it was the wild west. It was just wild. Like there were so many things that went on. And me and Julia are like, what the hell is this place? Like it was just like, how can I say? There are all these people jostling for power in this environment. And we were both like, this is not what we signed up for, but we need to stay here. And yeah, it was just, so on one side, you know, part of us were, you know, there was an excitement. We were like, this is definitely, we both believed this was the next step, right? This is the next step actually to get to a point where, you know, our investors realize they're, you know, an exit and ourselves and all of that. This is the ship that this organization has the best chance of becoming a unicorn, or, you know, of doing what our investors wanted. But actually, once we're on the inside, we're like, oh my gosh, this is not what we were expecting. And it was just a very different environment than we expected. And there was just so much going on. And I think there were a lot of people that just saw this as their, you know, their chance of, I don't know, making a name for themselves, or just going away with a load of money, really. And we were like, oh my God, this is supposed to be, you know, our adolescent or whatever. Like, you know, and we were like, we're not sure that we've raised this baby's the right one to go on and do that. It was just wild, man. It was so wild. Yeah.
I can literally picture, you know, when you think about the raw, authentic founders who are like, have this inherent motivation, and then they enter a space which has a very different type of motivations and drivers, right? And
and where you can't really pull the levers on the culture. You don't really have the role. I mean, there were things that we could do, and there were things that we did do, but then there's other people who've got different motivations, who are just backstab. It was wild. Like, it was just like, oh my gosh. We just came up against people who just were pretty smart in what they were doing, and just didn't really care about the organization at all. So yeah.
I wonder how much of support and awareness have you had prior this sort of circumstances happened? And I wonder whether there is a learning that we can take from this as a takeaway for other founders or for investors that might be sort of in the toolkit of preparing founders to sort of those different types of exits and situations. Because what I'm hearing you to say reminds me many stories of actually very senior entrepreneurs, and they reflecting on that indeed it's sort of a road to hell when you get stuck with someone. And Nektarios, you called it out when you exit to a corporate, which they say you didn't sign up for this. And so it's sort of in quote unquote suicidal for a lot of founders, because it just goes so deeply against of who you are, where you are, sort of why you've built what you've built. So want to come back to your situation. Was there any support at that time? And maybe how would you be reflecting on that today?
Yeah, no, there was no support at all. None at all. And I think that, you know, there are a couple of things. Like I like to speak to a lot of founders as well about this, because I feel as though understanding. So on one side, there are founders I speak to that don't realize, like, it's super important to have alignment and on the expectations with your investors, right? Because, and understanding what do your investors want from this? Like, why are they investing? They're not necessarily investing for just, you know, out of the goodness of their heart. They're expecting a return. And I think a lot of founders, and especially early stage founders, they pursue investment without realizing what that means. And I'm saying like basic stuff. Like I've been doing a lot of audits with founders. It's like a tool we've developed at OneTech to support founders with understanding how their startup and themselves are being assessed, and help them consider certain things like exits and stuff like that. And a lot of them don't even realize that they see it almost like as a means to an end. Almost like, you know what, I'm going to raise this money and I'm going to get free from whatever it is that they're facing, right? And they don't realize like that's just the beginning of the journey, right? You know, and all of that. And then I think the second thing is, to your point, like, or I think what you're insinuating, that there needs to be more help, whether that's through the investors, on how to navigate this. Like, what does the journey look like? There's so many different ways the journey could look. The journey isn't just one thing. Don't idealize the journey. Like, they have to get real about the practicalities of it. And there isn't enough being done. I'm not seeing, you know, I think to either of your points earlier about sharing of this, right? I've had conversations with some founders who've exited and realized we had similar kind of experiences. But like, I mean, even some of the stuff, like I'm not saying it just because it's, you know, out of the interests of the people, you know, who are involved, but just like there was some like just things I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy that I saw, you know, like and things that we experienced that were just mad. And it's just like, yeah, I like we both needed a lot of time afterwards to heal from what we experienced and how we got dragged into things. And yeah, it was just really, it was awful. And I think some of our investors didn't even realize some of the stuff we went through, you know, because of, again, like when you think about it, it also goes back to the way in which I say taught. And I say taught because I think a lot of accelerators push this, but just you just talk about, you know, the numbers and the positives and the roses and, you know, all of that without and denying who you are. You deny who you are, you deny the realness of your experience. And that a lot of that, and probably why a lot of people aren't even talking about the exit experiences, because they're still living this lie. Like when most founders are living a lie, like they're just presenting a rosy picture because they feel that they have to, and they actually probably won't even seek help because, or they just, you know, exit or leave their business because it becomes too much, you know. And at the end of the day, there needs to be support. I don't know, to be honest, if there are organizations that do this and whether it should be the investor. Maybe there is conflict of interest really for it to be the investor that does this, but at least maybe like support that is maybe paid for out of any money that's raised to actually support founders on their mental health, and other organizations that can support on this that don't have a vested interest in and a conflict of interest in how this all goes. But I do find it quite, even as like, you know, I've not invested in startups because I actually I invest through my time, but I do think it is a massive gamble. I really do. I think you know, I look at, you know, look at any other forms of investment, and it's very, very different to this. It's normally just numbers, and you know, I mean, that you can back, you have a particular strategy, you can backdate, you can back, you know, and but I feel like, and I hate to say it, but I feel like, you know, you don't really know the founder. You don't really know what they're going through. And actually, if we're going to get to a place of health, there needs to be more support, 100% in all shapes of form, in all sorts. And actually, when we do that, I think we will see more founders maybe getting to a place where they are, where everybody's happy, let's say, and more founders continuing on the journey, more support. They need more support. They need more support.
Healthier. I think that's the word
Healthy,
that I was like,
healthier.
it just feels more healthy than this.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I have a curiosity about about the unhealthy side of things. You mentioned the nightmares. Something triggered you writing this article recently. But there's also the piece that you mentioned earlier about identity. And I think all these things feed into each other. Are you comfortable telling a little bit more what you actually went through in terms of how did you realize that your mental health was, you're struggling with your mental health in that period of earnout, flying to Thailand, going through this experience? Because
Yeah.
I think it's important to spell these things out sometimes for people to actually go, oh my God, that's what I'm going through. Because people tend to rationalize and make them sound lighter than they actually are.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, I think at least back then, I don't think I'm as the same really now, but back then I would always process things much later than when they happened. And because of the nature of the startup game, the startup world, we were just always moving forward, 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 forward. So whenever there were conflicts, whenever there were issues, whenever we experienced things that were just unhealthy and just, trigger traumatic. We went through a lot of stuff. Whenever those things happened, I think both of us, and I mean, I don't want to speak for Julia, but certainly for myself, we would just move forward, move forward. The ecosystem was fairly unhealthy anyway. There's a lot of drinking. The culture wasn't very healthy. And so it was always just like late nights, parties, and just moving ahead, moving ahead, moving ahead. And failure was not an option. I remember, I think I talked about it in the last podcast. Failure was not an option until the point that we realized, do you know what? Failure is an option, and don't allow that to impact, infringe on your health and on myself. So anyway, as we came out of this and we exited, and then Cramix went under. When I was in Thailand, I think what had happened was that it was just like my subconscious catching up with me. And I was probably in a good place, consciously in a good place, in a great environment, having fun, much healthier. But then all the stuff that I had put and suppressed was just bubbling up. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in an amazing place. I'm having fun. I'm on to new stuff, but the past is still there. And that was the warning, when that was the realization that I needed to deal with that. So when we came back to London, and then we moved to Barcelona. When I was in Barcelona, that was when I made a conscious decision that I needed to start to deal with all of this. And that was when I started to microdose and started to explore alternative therapy, let's say, or therapy actually. And I actually went through a period of kind of isolation. And then I realized as well, on top of that, because I'd been doing the body bounce and Cramix game for 6-7 years, I realized I'd got to a place, I was working on a new product, and I got to a place whereby I was like, hold on, but who am I? Right, actually, who am I? I've kind of lost it through the whole body bounce experience and what had happened. And obviously unpacking all of that, I'm like, well, I'd actually built up this persona. So, when we're talking about the realness of what's going on, we built up this, which was a slight part facade, part all wrapped up in social media and all of that. I was like, who am I? As I'm unpacking all of this stuff, I'm unpacking myself, and I'm like, actually, who is Emma? What does Emma love? What are my interests? I'd kind of put all of those things on pause. And I think may have talked about this on the last podcast. But one of the things that happened was that I was neglecting family, friends. I was neglecting sports, things that I love, right? My interests. And so because I'd gone all in on body back, I'm like, who am I? What do I love? Aside from all of this experience, who am I? And I became a bit of a shell of myself. And I knew I needed to rebuild myself, basically. That was the realization. And so I took time out. And I remember every year we go away with friends, right? For Christmas, New Year. We rent a house together, and that year, I'd kind of introduced this group of friends to retrospective. Actually, I'd done it myself, but retrospectives, but doing it on yourself and doing it on, because I needed it, to be honest. Quite frankly, it was almost a selfish thing, but we were all doing it together, and it was a very beautiful time. But I remember one of the exercises we did was draw your year, draw yourself as an animal, draw your year as an animal. And my animal that year was a bear going into a cave into hibernation. So that's what I described to the group. And that was exactly it. I was like, I just needed to recollect myself, rebuild myself, reintegrate, like just like, who am I? What am I? Why am I doing what I'm doing? You know, what are my interests and all of that. And also, of course, I'd moved to a new country, new language, all of that. So it was like a load of change that happened in a short space of time. So yeah, that was what that was about. So the identity thing was a big one.
Mm.
You
Mm.
It's interesting, just a short one. When you were talking, I was thinking, because I've been through a similar period, and for me, the worst thing was I've become the cliche, and I didn't want to be the cliche, and I felt really embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
So the questions around identity, one, but for some reason I had this chip on my shoulder about the cliche because I was doing all the things that I would have not agreed to at the beginning if somebody told me this is the path. Because part of what you describe is also, if somebody says to you, this is all what's going to happen, it's guaranteed to happen, you go, I'm not signing up for that. But we just sweet talk everything. Oh, no, I'll be different. And at the end, I was like, I was not different. I wasn't special. I was exactly. Anyway, sorry. Didn't mean to bring myself in too much, but Vladi, we were going to say something.
It just made me reflect in a beautiful way. And there was sort of this mix of emotion as I was listening to you, Emma, when you were talking specifically about the part of like doing the self exploration and rebuilding and going deeper and asking, who am I? And who am I outside of work, right? Like, what are the layers and what really drives me and stuff? And it made me think about that. I wish that as part of the toolkit and the support that we keep talking about, it would be somewhere embedded in the very early of even when you're entering into the journey of becoming an entrepreneur and starting ventures and co-founding something with other people. Because I feel like the baggage that we carry, if we don't look back and we don't pause before we start this quite an intensive life experience, that personal material, as my therapist calls it, and that baggage that you have unresolved, you haven't looked into it, impacts so many other things and the way you show up. And so I just feel that it will be such a beautiful benefit and a gift to have this, to have done this work somewhere early, and then having it as a toolkit that you carry and you sort of keep coming back to it when in the moment of hardship. I sort of go and recharge because I've done the work, I've done the cleaning, and it's not like it stays the status quo. It keeps evolving, right? So you keep sort of in touch with it. But that's what you sort of remind me or made me think about.
Emma's doing a new thing. So you've done more new things since. So how much of this experience have you actually taken into your new venture?
Yeah, a lot. So obviously, so I don't even know if I mentioned it or if you know already, but yeah, I think I was an entrepreneur in residence at One Tech when we spoke last, and now we've just spun out of Capital Enterprise. So that is what I'm doing pretty much full time. And actually, I did develop something called the Entrepreneur Canvas. It was like a kind of like just a one-page canvas to actually do some of that, to keep asking yourself certain questions. And then we've recently developed plug this game, board game called the Startup Game, which and we're constantly trying to like develop tools and things to support people. But that specifically, I think one of the things that you don't get taught about from the outset is the journey. What does the journey look like? What could it look like? And it's a bit of a game that enables you to simulate that as well as the highs and lows of entrepreneurship, so that people get a sense of what that looks like before they go on the journey or during the journey. So I completely agree. These are things I think about quite a bit, about how can you support founders? How can you help them to do it in a way that is healthy, in a way that works for them? So actually, so I think a point that's made, like thinking about who you are, what your motivations are, what your aspirations are, what your goals are from the outset, and continuously asking yourself those questions, because, there's no point becoming or having an aspiration of becoming a unicorn if that's not something you want. that might be the aspiration or ideal exit for your investor, but is it what you truly want? Is it, you know, and most people don't know. They don't really know. They might realize there is the opportunity for that because actually you're playing in a field, the market's big, yada, yada, yada. But actually, is it something that you truly want to go down? Like, don't lie to yourself. Like, and I think that to your point, you know, if I think about myself when I was younger, I don't even think like I had, I think, gone to therapy for a breakup or something, but I didn't really truly know like and understand what I would get. Like this would be a beneficial for me. Like that actually, I didn't ask myself the deep questions back then. I didn't really, you know, I didn't have that support. But I do 100% think, yeah, founders need to be doing that from the outset. They need to have a suite of tools and people around them that are going to support them, whether that's your peer-to-peer community at, you know, as a minimum, all the way through to, you know, therapist, coach, that kind of thing. And I know it's not always going to be something that is accessible for everyone, but I think hopefully there are more and more tools and platforms and people, yourselves as well, who are providing access to stories, tools, and things like that to support founders. So it's probably a better, you know, better time than ever to actually be a founder, but there's still a lot more that can be done.
What are you doing to be better nowadays?
Lots of different things. Like I think one of the biggest things, this is something I heard James Clear, so Atomic, the author of Atomic Habits, say this on a podcast I think last year. And it was something like, you know, whatever it is that whatever your goal is, try and do the things, one or two things ups, you know, downstream, you could say, from that goal. And so for me, like happiness is a daily thing. It isn't like, you know, something you do once or twice a year, right? So every day I constantly think, right, okay, if I'm going to get through this day, you know, you never know what's going to be thrown at you that day. I need to make sure that my endorphin levels are high. I need to make sure that. So for me, I'm very experimental, but gym, it's been a bit rubbish to be fair because I've been away. But yeah, I try to go to the gym 3 times a week, do a lot of exercise, more time with friends, you know, even if it's just conversations on a phone, but I try to like connect, try not to do too much overtime unless I really have to, you know, spending time with my family. I really prioritize that, but just having a very balanced life. And yeah, to my point earlier, just making sure that, you know, to the point about endorphins I made, like no matter what, I'm operating from this level, not from down here. Because if you're operating from down here and I don't know, someone pushes you in the street by accident, that can set you off. So I'm trying to do as much as I can to minimize those fluctuations in mood and just trying to keep a balanced life. And then also just, I think, maybe to the point, maybe in the previous podcast, just around the way in which I think the way in which I see life is very different. And actually, that's one of the benefits that I got from entrepreneurship, to be honest, is just around like failing fast and just seeing everything as a learning opportunity for learning and always trying to put, you know, myself out there and trying to challenge myself. And I feel like what I've found is that my confidence was organically just grown just by me being me and not from external things, but actually just by me being in touch with myself and really kind of, yeah, again, kind of, you know, I don't want to be that, you know, woo-woo person, but just like really like getting to know myself more and loving myself. And I feel like, yeah, that's one of the biggest benefits I've got from this journey. And I love the journey, don't get me wrong. Like I wouldn't be who I am today without having gone through all of the things that we've had to go through to get to this point. But I feel definitely like I'm at a point in my life where I know myself way more than I did. And I'm loving each day as it comes, you know what I mean? Whatever life throws at me, really.
That's beautiful to hear. And thank you for sharing again your story and allowing us together reflect also on the sort of a new element, which as we said, for a lot of founders might still feel as a taboo and maybe they haven't even asked themselves the bigger questions.
I have one more question.
There you go. Okay.
You
So
sounded like you're about to wrap up.
reflection to no, I'll close with the reflection, and so let's do the question and then we'll close on reflection.
How much do you identify today as an entrepreneur, Emma? Or what is your
Oh,
identity today?
yeah. I always say creative problem solver, because I think that, yeah, okay, right now I'm solving a problem that is part of a business entity. But, tomorrow could be something else. Maybe I just, become an artist or whatever. I don't know. But I always say creative problem solver because I think that's where the core of what I love and what gives me energy is, I love problem solving, and I love the early bits and beginning bits and bringing fresh ideas and gaining inspiration, but it's not necessarily just within the discipline of entrepreneurship or tech even, right? I think that I could apply this in anything in the future. So yeah, and board games. Who would have thought? So yeah.
Awesome.
I can
you.
sense a lot of the freedom that you've been talking before about, that actually that was one of the major drivers for you, and you were describing the identity was a visual for me of like really getting through the box of like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, and it might feel a little too small and a little suffocating. And now I think it feels like from outside that you created for yourself this much vast space of being who you
100%.
are.
100%. And like whether that's playing paddle, like tomorrow I'll go and play paddle with someone from friends. Like I'll be always, I want to put that into whatever it is I'm doing. So trying to win or, trying to get better. Yeah, I feel like that is that. Like you say, like even though, like, to be fair, I am an entrepreneur, but I know that I won't always be an entrepreneur, or I'll probably look at other things in the future, and I'm trying to apply the same elements of myself to that. So
yeah, no, wonderful. So hopefully this has been useful also for a lot of people out there in terms of just reflecting on the fact that being aware and being informed as well. Hopefully some investors who are listening are also taking some input from this, that the support is needed, and that it is tough for people when they're on the journey alone. And especially, as we said, I mean, a lot of the founders are solo founders and first-time founders, and that's a tough place to be. So thank you again, Emma. It's been wonderful.
Thank you both. Thank you for having me.